Let's take a moment to talk about a city that was once the crown jewel of Australia, Sydney. Beaches, skyscrapers, career opportunities, and a lifestyle that, at one point, many dreamed of. But today, that dream is quietly slipping away. Not for tourists, not for foreign investors, but for everyday Australians, families, workers, students, and retirees, who are being pushed out, priced out, and locked out of the city they once called home. This isn't a temporary blip. It's a full-blown trend. The kind of shift that quietly alters the fabric of a nation. Today, we're diving deep into why and how Australians are being pushed out of Sydney. The data is clear, the stories are real, and the consequences, they're bigger than you think. Let's start with a number. 35,200. That's how many people left Sydney for other parts of Australia in just 1 year. The 12 months to June 2023. And it wasn't an anomaly. It was the highest internal migration loss of any city in Australia, continuing a decade-long trend that shows no sign of slowing down. Since 2011, more people have packed up and left Sydney than moved in. And in the past 3 years alone, Sydney has lost over 129,000 residents to other parts of the country. Where are they going? To cities like Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, and increasingly to regional hubs like Geelong, the Central Coast, and parts of northern New South Wales. These areas offer a lower cost of living, more space, and, thanks to remote work, the ability to keep a city job without the city chaos. But the big question is, why are people leaving Australia's most iconic city? The answer is simple: money. Let's address the obvious: housing. As of early 2025, the median house price in Sydney is hovering around $1.6 million. And that's not for a luxury home with a harbour view. That's the median. Even a basic apartment will set you back more than $800,000. If you're renting, brace yourself for $750 a week for a modest 2-bedroom unit. In inner-city areas, it's even higher. But this isn't just a matter of high prices. It's a matter of accessibility. Many everyday Australians are stuck. Stuck renting because buying is out of reach. Stuck saving for a deposit that grows further out of reach with every passing month. Stuck commuting from the outer edges of the city, or beyond, just to find somewhere affordable. According to Core Logic, a household earning Sydney's median income would now need to allocate over 50% of that income to mortgage repayments. That's well beyond the housing stress threshold of 30%. And renters? They're arguably worse off. Vacancy rates in many suburbs have dropped below 1%, and in the past year alone, rents have jumped more than 20%. In simple terms, Sydney is becoming a city where earning a decent income is no longer enough to live decently. Now, you might be thinking, surely wages in Sydney are higher? Yes, they are. But not by much, and certainly not enough to bridge the widening gap between income and the cost of living. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, average weekly earnings in New South Wales are around $1,950, only modestly above the national average. That slight bump might help in a cheaper city. In Sydney, it barely scratches the surface. When you stack that income against the cost of housing, utilities, food, transport, and especially childcare, the equation just doesn't add up. And it's been like this for a while. Wages have barely moved in real terms for over a decade. Meanwhile, housing prices have surged. Between 2012 and 2022, Sydney's house prices shot up by nearly 90%. Over the same period, median full-time wages increased by just 26%. This growing disconnect is one of the biggest reasons why even middle-income Australians, teachers, nurses, tradies, admin workers, are quietly packing up and heading elsewhere. It's not about laziness or lack of ambition. It's about basic economics. You can work hard and save diligently, but in Sydney it often feels like you're sprinting on a treadmill that only speeds up, while everyone else seems to be running past you. Now let's talk about the people caught in the middle: families. For a young couple with kids, living in Sydney can feel like a never-ending financial siege. Everything is expensive, and not just housing. Start with childcare. The average cost is around $160 per day per child before government subsidies. That's over $1,500 a month for just a few days a week, per child. If you've got 2 kids under school age, you're looking at costs rivaling a second mortgage. Then there's school. Even in the public system, parents fork out for uniforms, supplies, excursions, and extracurriculars. It's not uncommon for annual school-related expenses to run into the thousands. Commuting? The average Sydney worker spends around 90 minutes a day just getting to and from their job, often from the far-flung suburbs where housing is more affordable. That's 7.5 hours a week in transit, just to make ends meet. And don't forget the basics: groceries, energy bills, fuel, and insurance. The average household in Sydney now spends more than $400 a week on food alone. Add in the rest, and the financial pressure quickly becomes unsustainable. The result? A growing class of what economists call the working poor, dual-income households who are doing everything right but still can't get ahead. In Sydney, that's no longer the exception. It's becoming the norm. So where are Sydneysiders going? According to the latest ABS data, there's been strong population growth in regional New South Wales, southeast Queensland, and peri-urban centres like Newcastle, Wollongong, and the Central Coast. These areas offer a more attractive balance: lower housing costs, more space, and a slower pace of life. And thanks to the rise of remote and hybrid work, many people can now keep their Sydney-based jobs while living outside the city's financial chokehold. One of the biggest winners of this migration shift is Brisbane. With median house prices still sitting under $900,000, it presents a far more achievable property market for families, first-home buyers, and downsizers. It also has better rental availability, shorter commute times, and fewer daily costs. For many, it's not just cheaper, it's also a better quality of life. But this shift isn't without consequences. The regional and peri-urban boom has brought its own set of challenges: rising property prices in once affordable towns, stretched public services, traffic congestion, and growing pressure on local infrastructure. In a sense, Sydney's housing crisis is starting to spill over, pushing stress and scarcity into places that were once considered refuges. The affordability gap is closing, and not always in a good way. It would be unfair and incomplete to talk about Sydney's affordability crisis without mentioning immigration and foreign investment. In 2023, Australia recorded over 500,000 net overseas arrivals, the highest level of migration in the country's history. And naturally, a significant portion of these newcomers landed in Sydney, the gateway city. Immigration is vital to Australia's economy, filling skill shortages and driving growth. But it also puts added pressure on an already strained housing market, especially rentals, where availability is scarce and prices are soaring. Then there's the issue of foreign investment. Even with stricter government controls in place, Sydney continues to attract global investors, particularly from Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe, looking for capital-safe assets. For many of these buyers, the goal isn't to live in the property, but to park their wealth in a stable market. That demand has helped push property prices beyond what local residents can afford. In some suburbs, more than 20% of the housing stock is owned by investors, both domestic and foreign. That creates fierce competition for available homes and significantly reduces the pool of properties accessible to first-home buyers or even renters trying to get a foothold in the market. Now let's get to the tough question. How did it come to this? Is this just the invisible hand of the market doing its thing? Or is it the result of deep policy failures? The truth is, it's both. Yes, market forces play a role. Sydney is a global city with global demand, but what's made things truly unsustainable is decades of poor planning, short-term political thinking, and missed opportunities. State and federal governments have failed to match population growth with housing supply. Zoning restrictions, painfully slow development approvals, and political resistance to increased density, especially in affluent inner suburbs, have severely limited the city's ability to grow in an affordable and sustainable way. At the same time, policy decisions have incentivized speculation over shelter. Tax breaks like negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount have made property a lucrative investment, not just for the wealthy, but for anyone who can get a foot in the door. This has turned homes into assets first and places to live second. Even well-intentioned policies, like first home buyer grants, have often done more harm than good by boosting demand without increasing supply, which only inflates prices further. Meanwhile, the real estate lobby remains one of the most powerful forces in Australian politics, and governments have shown little real appetite for the structural reforms that could turn the tide. There's a deeper cultural shift happening too. For a long time, the Australian dream was to own a home, preferably in a city like Sydney with a backyard and room to grow. Today, that dream is evolving. For many, it's simply financial security, or the freedom to live without being rent-burdened, or the ability to start a family without compromising your quality of life. This shift in priorities is changing the demographics of Sydney. Young people are leaving, families are leaving, even retirees are selling up and downsizing elsewhere. What's left is a city increasingly populated by the very wealthy, international elites, and those clinging on by their fingernails. Let's pause and think about what Sydney is actually losing. When teachers, nurses, tradies, and hospitality workers leave, it's not just about housing. It's about the functionality of the city itself. Who runs the hospitals? Who builds the infrastructure? Who teaches the kids? Who pours your coffee? The essential workers that kept cities alive during the pandemic are now the ones being priced out of them. If you hollow out the middle and working class, you don't just lose diversity, you lose resilience. So, is Sydney doomed to become a city only for the rich and transient? Or can it reinvent itself? There are glimmers of hope. Some councils are experimenting with medium-density housing, build-to-rent models, and co-living solutions. The New South Wales government has pledged to build hundreds of thousands of new homes by 2030. Though critics say it's too little, too late. Remote work and hybrid roles have eased pressure somewhat by allowing people to live further out. And advocacy for housing reform is growing, particularly among younger voters. But systemic change takes time. And for many Australians, the wait is simply too long. At the heart of this story is a sobering reality. Sydney, for all its beauty and brilliance, is at risk of becoming a place where ordinary Australians can no longer afford to live. A city where the barista serving your coffee commutes 2 hours each way. Where nurses rent share houses well into their 40s. Where young families say goodbye not because they want to, but because they have to. This isn't just a housing story. It's a story about fairness, priorities, and the soul of a city. Australia prides itself on being the lucky country, but for too many in Sydney, luck has run dry. And if we don't address the root causes now, we risk turning our most iconic city into a hollow shell. Beautiful on the outside, but empty of the people who once gave it life. The exodus is real. The pain is growing. And unless something changes, the question isn't whether more Australians will leave Sydney. It's whether anyone earning an average income can afford to stay. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And as always, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.